You guys have some Dynasty questions haunting you right now, and so do I. So let's cover some of those topics in today's video. I'll be breaking down 6 burning Dynasty fantasy football questions that you guys asked for in the Discord. A reminder that before we get into it, now that we are officially in April, we will be shutting down our old Discord, our old Patreon at the end of the month following the NFL draft. So make sure that you guys are checking out our new site, flockfantasy.com, and use the promo code FSE for 30% off to get access to all of our rankings, bonus video content, databases, first access to Dynasty Decisions, a private group chat in our new Discord, and you'll also get 2 days for free to check out the site when you create an account using that promo code. So check that out if you're interested. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this video at any point, but let's get into it. All right, so question 1 actually comes from me. You guys did not request this question, but I actually want to talk about this. So what the hell is going on with Trey Lance and with Brock Purdy? What the heck do we do with these guys? You guys know here at FSE, we were very, very high on Trey Lance after he got selected 3rd overall to San Francisco in 2021. Since then, through no fault of his own, he's kind of only appeared in a couple of games here and there. He was redshirted most of his rookie season, and then in his second season, he suffers a season-ending injury in week 2. Basically played one game in his second year, just a monsoon game against the Bears in week 1. Then we saw 2022's Mr. Irrelevant in Brock Purdy come in, post a 16-4 touchdown interception ratio, a top 13 PFF grade of 77.7 as a 7th round rookie, and go undefeated until getting hurt in the NFC Championship against the Philadelphia Eagles. So many people, you guys probably included, are wondering, should we buy low on Trey Lance? Should we sell him right now? Is Brock Purdy going to be the starter? Should we buy low on him? Should we sell him? Is he just a flash in the pan? Here is my stance on it. I'm going to break down my entire stance here on what I'm going to be doing in my own Dynasty leagues for you guys to either agree with or disagree with, and let me know in the comments what you guys are doing with Trey Lance. This is the NFL, right? The NFL stands for one thing: not for long, right? If somebody comes in behind you because of injury through no fault of your own and plays out of their mind like Brock Purdy did, the coach will not care that he spent 3 first-round picks to get you. The 3rd overall pick and 2 other first-round picks is the sunk cost that the 49ers have in Trey Lance. So even though I think the 49ers would love for Trey Lance to work out, I think they're tempering their expectations at this point to just give him a shot at the starting job, which it sounds like by all indications he's going to have. But for me, I'm more likely to sell Trey Lance at his current cost right now of quarterback 17, quarterback 16, give or take, and late first round type of value. If you guys can re-roll him into a 2024 first right now, I would do it. A random first, a contender's first, I don't really care. If I can re-roll him into a pick that would get me Will Levis in this upcoming draft class, who's a fresh rookie with a new profile that could work out to the tune of Trey Lance as well, I would be willing to do that. So if somebody was willing to give you the 109 and you know you can get Will Levis there, then I'd be willing to do that as well. Currently, right now, according to Keep Trade Cut, his value-adjacent overall players are guys like Jordan Love, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, a 2023 late first, a random first in 2024. You guys get the picture. If you're in need of a quarterback, I would probably try and re-roll him into a future first to get you a quarterback, or like I said, a first that can get you in to striking distance for Will Levis. Same thing goes for Brock Purdy. If all it costs me is the 206, the 207, 208 in this year's class, which we're talking about like a day 3 running back or like a subpar wide receiver prospect that goes in like the 2nd or 3rd round, or I can get my 2024 second and I'm a contender and I can ship it off as a late, mid to late second in next year's class, I'm okay taking the swing on Brock Purdy. The upside for him, it seems like it's capped because, you know, he's not going to run like Trey Lance would, or he's not going to be this superstar caliber fantasy asset like Trey Lance would have. But if you gave us, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Kirk Cousins in an offense with playmakers like the San Francisco 49ers, then we'd be talking about a guy that would be value insulated as a top 15 quarterback in Dynasty. So, and of course, this entire discussion and debate comes from John Lynch's comments at the NFL owners meetings last week, where he basically said that I think Brock Purdy has earned the right to be the starter. If he were to line up and he were to be healthy, he would get the first crack at the starting job. And I think that speaks volumes about what Kyle Shanahan and what John Lynch are thinking of right now, which is winning games, right? They're not concerned with the 3rd overall pick and the 2 first rounders that they invested in Trey Lance. At one point in time, they wanted him to be, you know, the next Patrick Mahomes, the next whoever quarterback that you sit for a year and develop at that point. But with Trey Lance, he hasn't been able to stay on the field. He was a risk coming in with the prospect profile that he had. So the overall sentiment from the 49ers seems to be that if Brock Purdy's healthy, he's going to be the starter. And also, the overall sentiment in the NFL draft community seems to be a lot different than the overall sentiment in the fantasy community. The NFL draft community is like, what did we get wrong with Brock Purdy? How can we find the next Brock Purdy? The NFL, the fantasy football community is like, cute story, bro. Like, Trey Lance is going to get his job back now. Like, nah, dude, I'm pretty sure he's got to earn the job if Purdy and him are both healthy. And I think also, as we've heard from the 49ers brass, that Purdy will have the leg up on Trey Lance. And as much as I loved Trey Lance coming into the season, coming into last season in rookie drafts a couple of years ago, he hasn't really shown a whole bunch in games. And then at that point, we just have to rely on what he's shown in practice. And by all accounts, it sounds like it hasn't been that much either. Otherwise, we would have heard a ton of reports saying that it's Trey Lance's job. He's going to be the guy once he's healthy, like we heard about Patrick Mahomes after his redshirt rookie season, or like we have heard so far about Jordan Love since they've been talking about dealing Aaron Rodgers. So for me, if all you can get is a first-round pick for Trey Lance, I'm still willing to deal him. A solid asset in that range is enough for me to sell on a guy like Trey Lance. If you can't get that, if somebody's only willing to give you a second rounder or whatever the case is, then I'd be willing to hold. But for Brock Purdy, if the cost is a mid to 2023 second, if it's a late 2024 second or something like that, or potentially less, I'm taking the plunge. If that manager won't sell, then I'd probably hold. But for me, I'm more likely to buy Brock Purdy and sell Trey Lance at this point in time, given all of the stuff that we've heard from the 49ers brass, given what's played out on the field. So for me, that's my stance on the Trey Lance and Brock Purdy situation. Hopefully that helped you guys out. Let me know your stance down below in the comments. Question number 2. In the 6 burning dynasty questions here comes from A. Stroud, who's a Flocker tier member over on the new site. He has a couple questions here. How do we know when to tier up a player? He asked another question, but I really like this one for sure. So tiering up, basically what he means by this, if you don't know what he means by tiering up, it just means if you have like a tier 4 wide receiver on your roster and you want to go after a better wide receiver, how do we know when that's the right time to strike? So it's a pretty complicated subject, I'd say, because I think it depends on what position group you're talking about. For wide receivers, I'll kind of break down my stance on tiering up. There's a large cluster of wide receivers in every tier. So for me, tiering down actually makes more sense more often than not, because you can collect value and get more swings at draft picks. But tier 1 at wide receiver is pretty clear, right? It's Jefferson, it's Chase. Tier 2 is a big cluster of CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, guys like this, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave. So there's a large tier in tier 2. Tier 3 is, again, another large tier. You have guys like the aging wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. But then you also have some young guys that still have a little bit to prove or are maybe just not as consistent as the higher tier. Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman Jr., Treylon Burks, Brandon Ayuk, Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, guys like that. So there's 3 major tiers of wide receivers that have value in fantasy leagues right now. So with wide receivers, I'd say the way that you know when it's time to tier up is when there's not a huge price difference between, let's say, a player like Chris Olave, who's at the end of that tier 2 of wide receivers, and the player that you want to go get in your league's market. So let's say that you have Chris Olave on your team and you're a contender. You're looking for future points, and you can find a tier up possibility with the manager that has A.J. Brown because he is a rebuilder. He's looking to get a little bit younger at that position, and all it costs you to go from Chris Olave, who's much younger than A.J. Brown, is a 3rd round pick. That makes sense as a tier up opportunity. Same would go if you're trying to go from a tier 3 wide receiver like Christian Watson, for example, and all you have to do is add in a 2nd rounder, a 3rd rounder, maybe another young piece to go after a guy like Jalen Waddle, for example. So wide receivers, to me, it makes sense when the price difference is not all that different to go from one tier to another. And the same can be said probably for quarterback as well, because let's say a tier 2 quarterback like Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, those guys are generally undervalued on the market right now. And you can take a tier 3 quarterback like Daniel Jones, who's on the up in the eyes of the market right now. It may only cost you a 2nd rounder or a late 1st to get up to a guy like Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson, maybe just a 2nd rounder to get up to a guy like Kyler Murray or Deshaun Watson. And to me, the easy answer to this entire question is when you can tier up, when the player that you have on your roster is on the up in the market and the player that you're going after is on the down in the market, but you still view them as a tier break in your mind. So market perception is a big time distinguisher in knowing when to tier up. And the same could be said from going from a guy like Hawkinson, who's up on the market right now, to a guy like Pitts, who's down on the market right now. But there's still a distinct tier difference between those players in my mind. Or a guy like Josh Jacobs, who's on the up on the market right now, to a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who's on the down on the market right now. But again, there's a distinct tier break difference between those players. So hopefully that answers your question. Now let's get in to question number 3, which is from Meister. And he actually asked this question on the previous 6 Burning Dynasty questions video that I did, but I never got to it because I liked his question so much that I said I would make an entire video on it, and I must have just forgotten to do that. So his question basically is, how often should you trust your instincts when scouting rookies, or trust consensus, or keep consensus in mind? And is it also good to diversify between those two approaches? So the reason I love this question, it's because it's very complex, right? It's a very loaded question. And I do think when you're scouting rookies, as much as it's important to trust your instincts, it is important to keep in mind what consensus thinks, because there's probably a reason that consensus loves a certain player or hates a certain player or thinks this player is wide receiver 1 or quarterback 1 or whatever the case is. But ultimately, trusting your instincts is very, very fundamental when it comes to scouting rookies. In Dynasty, I'm firmly of the belief that I want to make my own mistakes and I want to hit my own home runs. So as much as I'm going to factor in what consensus thinks, I'm not going to let them tell me a player that I don't think is very good just because the market thinks he's very good. So for example, you guys know that I love Jordan Addison. I love Chase Brown. I love Bryce Young. I love Michael Mayer. Guys like this. I have a firm stance on these players, and I'm higher on them than market consensus, and that's great. I'm sure those of you guys listening to this right now have stances on players that I may disagree with or the market disagrees with, and that's perfect. That's your conviction. That's you doing your own homework. However, what we want to do is exploit the market, not try and outsmart it. So just because I believe that Jordan Addison is on par or even slightly better than Jackson Smith-Njigba doesn't mean I'm actually going to select Jordan Addison over JSN in a rookie draft. The reason I'm not going to do that is because I don't have to. The market is so firm on the stance that JSN is wide receiver 1 that if I'm picking 105 in a rookie draft, for example, and JSN and Jordan Addison, who are my 2 highest ranked players, are on the board, I know that the market inherently values JSN much higher, and I could go down to the 106, the 107 pick holders and say, what do you want to come up for Jackson Smith-Njigba? They'll probably give me a second, if not more, to move down 1 pick or 2 picks, and I would still get the player that I was going to take anyway in Jordan Addison. So if I can make that profit, potentially move down a few spots and still get the player I wanted at 105, then that definitely makes a ton of sense. And that's the example of exploiting the market versus trying to outsmart the market. I'm not trying to prove I'm smarter than anybody by taking Jordan Addison 105 if I don't have to. I can just move down, pick up a second rounder, still get Jordan Addison, and not have to be the guy that took Jordan Addison over JSN if that take doesn't age very well. So same goes for the second round. Chase Brown right now is my 202 in rookie drafts. If the draft comes, he gets good draft capital and a solid landing spot, he'll probably stay ranked that high. But the market may view him, even if that stuff happens, as the 208 to the 210. Instead of taking him at 202 and trying to prove I'm smarter than everybody, what I can do is then trade down to 206, 207, 208 to make sure I still get my guy, but also then profit some future picks or a player for moving down. And as far as diversifying, what basically Meister means, if you guys don't know what diversifying means, it means that if I believe Addison is over JSN, would I take Addison over JSN in one league? And then because I play in multiple leagues, take JSN over Addison in another league to hedge my bet against that stance. And basically, for diversifying, I'm firmly in the camp of conviction over diversifying. So I'd say lean conviction. If you believe this player's substantially better than the other player, I may fiddle down with trading down at some point to try and get some diversification that way. But for the most part, I doubt I would pull the trigger straight up, pick this player over that player, even though I view this player as better in a league. So for example, I have a bunch of 102s in my dynasty leagues right now. I'm probably going to have a lot of Bryce Young as a result of that. I might fiddle down with trying to trade down to see if I can get Bryce Young at a different pick, or maybe if some guy really wants Bryce Young and he's willing to overpay for him, I might trade down a little bit and take 103 CJ Stroud or 104 Anthony Richardson. But for the most part, I probably would not just outright take CJ Stroud 102 if I believe Bryce Young is firmly my 102. So that's kind of where I stand on diversification. I would say also reading the draft room would be very, very important, and seeing if I can diversify in a different way as opposed to the traditional just take this player in one league, take another player in the other league, and that way you hedge your bets against you potentially. So to sum up, basically the goal is to be active in trades during the rookie draft. That way you can trust your instincts and be able to exploit the market, or you can ensure that you get the best value possible when you're trying to diversify your portfolio. So hopefully that answers your question, Meister. Sorry it took me so long to get to it. Question number 4, our mother flocker tier of ours, Daniel asks, how do we value the 2023 draft class versus the 2024 draft class now that we have a good understanding of how good the 2023 class is, right? We have RAS scores, combine numbers, draft capital projections, all that kind of stuff. So the easy answer, Daniel, is basically that we operate under the assumption that 2024 picks will always hold their value because rookie picks always do. So if we have the opportunity to potentially punt a late 2023 first into a random 2024 first, it's always a good strategy, no matter what, how good the class is going to be next year, how bad the class is going to be next year. It will always appreciate in value over time. So as far as, is the quarterback one, Bryce Young, better than the quarterback one, Caleb Williams next year? Is the running back one, Bijan Robinson, better than, Travion Henderson next year? Is the wide receiver one, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, better than Marvin Harrison next year? When it comes to player takes, 2023 versus 2024, that's ultimately up to us evaluating the profiles of these players ahead of time, and specifically those 2024 players, because we pretty much know for the most part about the 2023 class at this point. And to summarize, if you guys are new around here, the 2023 class can be summarized this way. It's a good quarterback class, right? We have strong top 4 quarterbacks expected to go in the first round. We have an elite RB1 in Bijan Robinson. We have a great RB2 in Jahmyr Gibbs. We also have a lot of running back depth in this class, starting with guys like Charbonnet, Chase Brown, Tank Bigsby, whoever you like, Kendre Miller, Zach Evans, whatever. The wide receiver class is also not very good. I would say at the top, we're lacking a true alpha stud wide receiver, but we do have guys like Jordan Addison, JSN, Quentin Johnson, who are going to be first round picks in the actual NFL draft. But the depth is very, very suspect in the wide receiver class. Wide receiver next year looks a lot better, especially at the top with an elite prospect like Marvin Harrison Jr. Running back looks very strong at the top with a couple guys like Travion Henderson and Braylon Allen and Raheem Sanders. It looks like we're going to have more day 2 picks at running back than we would in this year's class, even if there's no Bijan Robinson. And then the quarterback class, I mean, Caleb Williams looks like he's going to be the next elite prospect, the next Trevor Lawrence, the next Andrew Luck, whatever. And then we also have a very, very good prospect in Drake May, who might be better than Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and would have been the quarterback one in this class had he come out. And it looks like we also have some great QB depth with guys like Quinn Ewers, with JJ McCarthy, with Jackson Dart, with KJ Jefferson. It looks like there's, Shadur Sanders. It looks like there's a lot of opportunity for the quarterback class to be at least as good, if not better, next year than it is this year. And then the tight end class, this year, it's so good. It's so deep. Next year, we have Brock Bowers, who's obviously going to be a great prospect, but it doesn't look like it's going to be as deep as this year's class. So hopefully that answers your question. That's me kind of comparing the 2023 to the 2024 class. I would say as of now, kind of just assume it's going to be as good as 2023, just given what I know about the 2024 class, but the high-end talent might be definitely better in 2024 than it is in 2023 as it currently stands. Not to say that Bijan Robinson and Bryce Young are bad prospects as the high-end talent in this class, but we might have some freaking natures next year. So question number 5, Mother Flocker tier member Claire asks, how would you value the Ravens assets if Lamar Jackson sits out or gets traded? Should we move off of guys like Mark Andrews? And what are his value and that value of Bateman and Dobbins and the other guys involved? So to me, Ravens assets would likely be buys if Lamar sits out or not, because the reason I really like buying the Ravens right now is the new addition of Todd Monken. Todd Monken is coming in, who used to be the OC of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so I'm kind of familiar with his scheme. He used to be the OC of the Cleveland Browns for a year, and then he's been at Georgia ever since, kind of working with Stetson Bennett and guys like George Pickens and the running game that they have there. I think he's going to throw the ball a lot more than like 500 times a season, like the Baltimore Ravens have been doing. Mark Andrews has shown he can produce no matter who the quarterback is, whether it's Huntley, whether it's Lamar Jackson, whether they go out and address the quarterback position. If they trade Lamar, maybe they get a quarterback back from a different team or something like that. I think he's a great buy for contenders right now because Mark Andrews has shown he can produce no matter who the quarterback is, and he's an elite tight end in real life and in fantasy. So I'd be more willing to buy Mark Andrews right now, given the uncertainty. Same goes for Lamar Jackson himself. And then J.K. Dobbins, he's now 2 years removed from an ACL tear, so I like buying him as well no matter what, whether Lamar is there or not. And if no Lamar, we don't have Lamar Jackson as the quarterback in Baltimore, we have now an ability for J.K. Dobbins to unlock what he's shown as elite pass-catching efficiency over the course of his career may come to light, right? If he doesn't have a mobile quarterback anymore, or he doesn't have Lamar Jackson anymore, I'd say he'd be the biggest buy of anybody here because he could actually finally realize that pass catching potential that he's shown in his rookie season and towards the end of last season. And then Rashad Bateman would benefit probably from increase in pass volume, the new scheme that Todd Monken would be running as well. And I like buying him in general right now because I think, aside from injuries, he's really shown us that he can actually earn targets. And when he's been on the field, he's been able to do that. So as long as he can stay healthy, I actually like outlook for Rashad Bateman and Dynasty. So for me, this whole Ravens offense is pretty much a buy for me right now due to the uncertainty of Lamar's situation. And then if Lamar stays, they're all good players. So for me, I like buying into the Ravens offense, regardless if Lamar stays, if he gets traded, if he holds out, whatever the case is. I think the Ravens assets are quite good buys right now. Question number 6 comes from Forador, and this is the last question of the video. He basically asked, how much do you value offensive team production versus individual talent when drafting in Dynasty? And he says, can you use Ayuk versus Judy for an example? So again, this is another loaded question. I'll try my best to sum this up in as brief amount of time as I can. I would say individual team talent applies more to long-term assets. So if you're building out a rebuild, you want to be more focused on individual talent versus offensive team production, because offensive team production can change quickly in the NFL, and it's more of like a redraft type of projection year over year, and that can impact the player's range of outcomes in the short term. But for the most part, it's more so valuable for contenders than it is for rebuilders. So this also acts a little bit differently too, depending on the position of the player that we're talking about. Because you guys know, for example, at wide receiver, talent wins out long term. Obviously, if you have a great wide receiver who's like the 20th best wide receiver in the NFL, it's going to be beneficial for him to be on a great offense with a great quarterback, be the number one of his team, and have a ton of pass volume. And that could propel him to a wide receiver one season versus a guy who plays with a shitty quarterback, shitty offensive situation, barely throws the ball, and has another great wide receiver to compete for targets with. But ultimately, wide receivers' talent will win out in the long term. So wide receivers, you're definitely going to want to be more focused on talent than you would be for the other positions, especially a position like running back, who we see untalented running backs finish as, the RB 15 points per game all the time. Think of a guy like Jamal Williams this past year, who was able to play for a high scoring team like the Detroit Lions, punch in a bunch of touchdowns, and be an RB2 in fantasy. I'd say make sure to value offensive situation, offensive team production more for running backs because, again, running backs are a short shelf life type of position anyway that are more situation dependent. And typically when you're drafting running backs, you're more focused on production as a contender anyway. Offensive situation definitely matters for wide receivers, for quarterbacks, for tight ends, but not quite as much as it does for running backs. So I would say if I had to rank them based on what offensive production matters for most and what offensive production matters for least, I would say it matters least for wide receivers, then probably quarterbacks, because we've seen, guys like Patrick Mahomes this past year, or even other quarterbacks like Justin Herbert. Sometimes when the offensive situation's not perfect, they don't have a great offensive line, the pass catching weapons like they were for Mahomes weren't as good this year, but he's still an elite quarterback, so he can propel the rest of the team. That stuff matters not as much for quarterbacks. Talent usually matters the most for quarterbacks as well. And then situation can matter a lot more for tight ends than it does for wide receivers, because sometimes you need a good offensive scheme, a good offensive coaching staff to be able to use a tight end effectively. And then, of course, running backs being the most situation dependent of all of the position groups, because we've seen bad running backs finish as high-end running backs in fantasy all the time. And we've seen talented running backs not be very good in fantasy, like DeAndre Swift, for a number of times as well. So hopefully this answered all of your guys' questions. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, comment down below any of your thoughts, hit the notification bell so you know anytime we post a video, and check out flockfantasy.com/FSE for all of our rankings, for all of our bonus content, for all of our new video series, Dynasty 101, where we break down micro and macro niche topics in Dynasty all the time. Definitely check that out. Gets you first priority on Dynasty decisions as well. So make sure to check out flockfantasy.com. Get 30% off with our promo code FSE and a 2-day free trial for checking it out. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.